So, Kina, let's start. Illinois' 7th Congressional District. Tell us about this district. Who are the people? What is the geography there? For those who are curious, tell us about that district.
Absolutely. So first off, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm a really big fan. So the Illinois 7th Congressional District is one of the most diverse districts in the country. Yeah, it has some of the greatest disparities. We are a D plus 38 district, which means we vote 38 points above the Republicans. Yeah, we are a deep dark blue district. We are #1 Democratic district in all of Illinois. We are the 5th most Democratic in the country. And so we are pretty primed and set to serve as a national model on how to move forth progressive agendas and get them done successfully without getting the political backlash of being bold and audacious. We have some of the wealthiest of the wealthy in the state of Illinois in our district, and some of the most working class communities that you can come across in the state. And so once again, it is racially and economically diverse. It is a majority Black district with 49% of the folks in Illinois 7 being African American. And so and nearly 70% people of color in total. So it is a minority district, but it is traditionally one of the historic grassroots progressive districts in Illinois who has been known to elect progressive.
I mean, when we're talking about a 38-point D plus a district in the partisan index, as you suggested. From my perspective, and frankly, I would like every single district in the country to be a progressive district. But when you have a district that is so heavily Democratic, where there is no threat of a Republican winning in this district, and it sounds, as if there's not. I imagine there'll be a Republican running, but
not a chance.
Not a chance. The key is that this should be a seat that is inhabited by someone who represents about as far left as you can get within the context of American politics, right? Because this is one of the safest congressional Democratic seats, and so you would want someone who is going to consistently push the envelope. Because there's a lot of, frankly, conservative Democrats in the House too. It's a big tent. So give me a sense of who's been in that office and for how long, and a sense of his voting record.
Yeah, so Congressman Davis, Danny K. Davis, has sat in the seat for 22 years. He's been my congressman practically my whole life. I've lived in the district my entire life. So we have seen 30 years ago, he primaried the person who sat in this seat, who was George Collins, which was a congressperson, and then Cardis Collins, his wife, who ended up getting the seat. He challenged him twice in trying to take the seat. So his record has been one when he started out as being an independent, being progressive. But what we've seen in the last decade is a stagnancy in the district. And I think you hit a really important point. We have no political backlash in staying on top of these issues, pushing things like a Green New Deal, pushing things like Medicare for All. He had to be lobbied by National Nurses United to join the Medicare for All caucus. And so while we know that he may vote in ways that we see beneficial in the Democratic Party, I think that the way that he is leading is not a way that is showing that there's a way to electrify the electorate. Here's something that I also like to let people know. The 2020 primary races in the presidential race should be about a return of representative democracy, which means transparency and government accountability and pushing forth a working class agenda. And when you are in a D plus 38 district and it's deep dark blue in a state like Illinois, this is prime for us to go to places like Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, and flip a lot of these places and get them just as energized to come on the side of the Democrats. Because what we do know is that when the numbers of people are increased for voter turnout, Democrats win. So I've been disappointed also just in the lack of leadership. It's no longer about electing a majority Democrat. It matters who those Democrats are.
Yeah, that's a fascinating and really good point, frankly, that I hadn't even contemplated is, the implications of this seat regionally. And when we talk about regions of the country that are crucial for both control of the House and the Senate, and obviously for the presidential campaign, being in the environment of Michigan and Wisconsin are hugely important. All right, so let's talk about let's talk a little bit about those policies. And when you talk about leadership, and you talk about making this seat, the 7th congressional district, so on the vanguard of where we want the country to go. When you think of your priorities from a national level, and then we'll talk also, in terms of specifically your district, but how do you think you can represent your district? What is the highest priority from the district perspective?
Yeah, I would say healthcare. Healthcare is the number one issue across the country, but especially in our district. Currently in the Illinois 7th Congressional District, we have the largest life expectancy gap in the country. So basically what that means is Streeterville, which is a swanky portion of the downtown Chicago area, the average household income is about $110K a year. The life expectancy is 90. If you travel a 9-mile radius to the south side of Chicago, which is also in our district, in the Englewood neighborhood, that life expectancy drops to about 60. So it's a 30-year gap just based off of the zip code that you live in and the median household income that you have. And we know it's because of the social determinants, right? It's the lead in the water, it's the toxins in the air, it's the bullets flying, it's the food deserts. All of those things contribute to life expectancy. The biggest difference between me and the 22-year incumbent who's sitting in the seat is that I refuse to take any corporate PAC money from big pharmaceutical companies and private insurance companies. And the reason is because we need to go in and tackle and close this healthcare equity gap that's not just happening here in the city of Chicago or in our district, but all across the country, quite frankly. And the way that we go into those congressional chambers and do that is speaking with the high moral authority when we don't take that corporate PAC money. Congressman Davis, cycle after cycle, has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from big pharmaceutical companies and private insurance companies. And while he has stuck his political flag in the ground and said that he supports a Medicare for All system, once again, it goes back to leadership. We should have task force on the ground to close that equity gap. We should be talking about bringing federal dollars for infrastructure and pulling up the piping for the lead that's in the water, right? We should be talking about how do we eradicate food deserts and medical deserts in working class communities. And so that's the number one issue that's happening in our district. And it's literally at the core of everything that folks are, having a problem with. When you talk about lead in the water, that's an environmental health issue. When you talk about bullets flying, that's a public health epidemic. When we talk about food deserts, that's a nutritional health issue. And so people want to know, what are we going to do to make sure that we're putting families and just everyday people first?
You outlined for us both the nature of the 7th Congressional District in Illinois and a really important dynamic that it plays regionally in terms of leadership on progressive issues. This is a district that you tell us has a 38 plus Democratic partisan index. In other words, there's never going to be a Republican that's going to win in this district. So the question is, what kind of Democrat are we going to get there? And I have to tell you right off the bat that I'm very impressed by the fact that you're not taking any corporate money. But I also have to ask, if this is such a safe Democratic district, why is, and I know it's hard to speak for your opponent, but why would your opponent, who has been in office since 97 there, and who's got, maybe not terribly enthusiastic positions, and that's really sort of part of the issue, it seems to me, on things like Medicare for All, why is he taking so much corporate PAC money? What is a little bit, when push comes to shove, you got to wonder what that corporate PAC money is going to do to his vote.
Yeah, and it actually, we saw in one of his voting records, he voted to not put more regulations on bank in the Dodd-Frank vote. So that actually, as somebody who sits in the D+38 seat and who has coined himself as progressive, that vote that he took was very stunning. We know that we need to be regulating banks, especially when you're in a majority people of color district or a majority Black district, because why? The banks have historically oppressed these groups of people in an institutionalized way by not giving home loans, by not assessing properties in the correct way, by not being fair in banking practices. And so all those things play a role in the way that, we operate and move our government forward. But I think it's also just a question of the Democratic Party as a whole. My campaign is about, like I said, a return of representative democracy, everyday people representing the economic realities of everyday people. I come from a strong pro-union household. My dad is Teamster and my mom is SEIU Local 73. So I know what it's like to grow up in a household living paycheck to paycheck. And unfortunately, the Democrats, the corporate Dems, have taken on these GOP and Republican talking points around running campaigns. And the truth of the matter is, whoever funds your campaign basically and bankrolls your campaign basically is the person who you're accountable to. And we want to be accountable to the people.
Kina, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I have to say that we interview a lot of people who are running in these primaries, and not everybody is as well versed and about the issues as frankly as you are. I think everybody we talk to, their heart's in the right place. But what have you been doing that sets you up for this run? Because you certainly seem to have an incredible grasp on the issues and a real clear vision of what role you could play as a representative of this district.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So I grew up in this district, like I said, on the west side of Chicago, I am the only candidate running in this race from a marginalized community. It is reflected in the life expectancy in my district, the average household income in my district, in my neighborhood, in this portion of the district is about $34,000 a year. So I'm surrounded around working class, blue collar people, and that has informed who I am as a person. Like I said, I grew up in a pro-union household, Teamster and SEIU. And so my parents always taught me the importance of integrity, hard work, and keeping community at the core. And so I've always had my finger on the pulse of my community and the temperature of my community. My background is in gun violence prevention and criminal justice reform work. So when I was about 7 years old, I witnessed a child shot and murdered in my neighborhood. I knew the shooter and I knew the victim, and it changed the entire trajectory of my life. I am the only candidate in this race that has went entire K through 12 in Chicago public schools. So I withstood the 50 public school shutdown that happened here in the city of Chicago, the largest American public school shutdown in the country and the history of the country, and saw the impacts that it had on my community. I've also written legislation. So in 2017, when Donald Trump got rid of an Obama-era policy called the White House Council on Women and Girls, which was formed by Valerie Jarrett, Tina Chin, and Mrs. Obama to protect women and girls across the country and make federal agencies look at their policy through a gender lens. When he got rid of that, I brought it back on the state level. I co-authored House Bill 5544, the Illinois Council on Women and Girls Act. It was landmark civil rights legislation that protected the rights of the transgender community, protected and centered the voices of women of color, expanded reproductive health care and education. I took on the GOP. I took on a billionaire Republican governor here in the state of Illinois, and I won. And it was through building coalition and sitting in a place of organizing and movement building. And so, of course, I'm a byproduct of the Black Lives Matter movement. I helped organize around Laquan McDonald, Alton Sterling, and other major high-profile shootings that took place in the country. And so for me, I've been organizing, building coalition, and writing policy, and I thought it was time for me to throw my hat in the ring and run for Congress.
Well, I'm looking at your website, Kina for Congress. It's KINA for FOR, Congress.com. And I'm looking on the issues page. And I got to say, one of the things that I'm really impressed by is a lot of Democrats who are frankly, generationally still waging a political battle that is that really feels like the 90s, frankly, and I should know, I'm that old, they'll put taxes right on the top of their page. And you deal with taxes. You recognize that we need to raise taxes on corporations and wealthy people. But you have a list of initiatives that you want to take, that taxes are there to ultimately to fund. But they're not, that's not the primary thing. You're talking about giving material benefits to people. And I think that is really where the center of the Democratic Party is today. And so I just wanted to give you a compliment on that. We only have about a minute and a half left. How are you going to win if you're not taking corporate money? And this guy's taking a bunch of corporate money. He's obviously got a long time in that district. You grew up in that district, so I imagine you have a lot of resources there, at least in terms of people. How are you going to win this race?
Yeah, that's the only way that we're going to win the race is by people power. Congressman Davis has been able to stay in the seat for as long as he has because nobody's been able to out-organize him. And so Chicago has had a series in the last few municipal elections and even statewide elections where we have insurgent candidates have taken on incumbents and won in a very big way. And we saw that in the mayoral race. We saw that in the city council race. 85% of our district is the city of Chicago. We see in the western suburbs that's happening on the local school boards. People, want us to go after these big name endorsements, and we have to go back to the roots of what our party is about and what power looks like. And in the Democratic Party, what I think power looks like is changing the hearts and the minds of people and massively mobilizing people. And so we're going after folks who are on those local school boards and village trustees and the not the big name presidential endorsements. We're going after what we know is connected and deeply rooted in the community. And here's the plain messaging. For 22 years, we've had the same leadership. And for 22 years, cost of living has gone up. Healthcare has become unaffordable. And the economic realities of working class people has not changed. Our wages have stayed the same. It's time to bring in a voice that will represent those everyday people. And I know that that's our campaign.
Kina Collins, KinaForCongress.com. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.